Check.
Right. Can you hear me?
I don't know. Can you hear that?
Me?
Can you hear the back?
1, 2, 1, 2. Oh. My voice is so bassy. Which channel am I on? Can you turn my bass down a bit? Can you?
Such a diva. You need individual EQ for each microphone.
It's just really bassy, isn't it? Hello. Bassy. There we go.
Hi, can everybody hear me okay? Hi, I'm Safi. Thank you so much to Joy Collective and Pelican House for hosting this and for getting me involved. I feel very pleased to be involved with discussing this really incredible history and with such a great panel. We've got Ed, we've got Steve, and we've got Aaron. Sadly, Grace couldn't make it today due to personal circumstances, but it was really great hearing all her stories in the documentary, so yeah. I wanted to start by talking about the documentary and about the research that's gone in. So obviously, Aaron, you made this documentary. Ed, last year you put out this book on dance music and British politics. What drew you both to telling the story or like researching free parties?
Well, I was always amazed nobody had done a film about it before, really, because it just seemed like a totally obvious idea, because it was something I remember. And going through that era, I remember thinking, this is really remarkable, this is really special. It does have this combination that I always thought about, that my mum went through in the 60s, of both musical, cultural explosion, but also political significance. So as I kind of, in a way, became a filmmaker in later life, I was always like, one day I'll make that Free Party film, because it's just a brilliant idea for a film. Why has nobody ever done it? And I always thought that if I didn't do it, somebody else would do a shit job. Maybe I have done a shit job. Thank you. I was so fishing for compliments there. So fishing for compliments. But I'm through hook or by crook, I suppose, getting something like this over the line in a DIY fashion, which is how it's been made. It's been made with Kickstarter campaigns, with private kind of people putting money in because they just literally wanted to see it come to life. I just knew as a story it was an absolute winner. As a, just as an outsider looking at a story that should be told. And what's been really lovely as a result of doing screenings like this, but also screenings at film festivals, both in the UK and in other countries, is it seems like that's the effect it has on other people, as in people go, wow, I really didn't know anything about this. Or they go, oh my God, I remember it, and I'm so glad somebody has finally told that story. So, thank you, whoever that was. You obviously agree, I hope. So hopefully that's an answer to your question.
And Ed, so in Party Lines, the Free Party movement scene was a big part of that story. Do you want to tell me what drew you to that?
Sure, so my inspirations were very similar to Aaron's, really. An interest in a story that maybe hadn't been told fully. Unlike Free Party and folk history, there are already some great books about this particular era, in particular Energy Flash by Simon Reynolds and Altered State by Matthew Collin, but both of those books were written in the late 90s, and I was really interested in something that contextualised this period of history and brought it up to the present day as well. And for me, this moment in history, the Criminal Justice Act, the Free Party scene, is kind of the fulcrum around which the entirety of modern British social political history revolves. If you look at the threads that radiate out from this scene, from this moment, they stretch into every corner of British life. It's almost impossible to imagine British society as it is today without rave being at the heart of it. There's a relatively famous clip of, I think it's Kilroy from maybe 1991, 92, where they're
Isn't Keir Starmer in that clip?
Exactly. So they interview a bunch of rave promoters, and then they go to this fresh-faced lawyer from the National Council for Civil Liberties who talks at length about the police using the same tactics that they did during the miners' strike, and it's a like 28-year-old Keir Starmer. So it's fascinating, these connections. I don't think you can really understand modern Britain without understanding the sort of stuff that Erin covers in this film.
And you do in your book.
Yes.
Steve, obviously you were there.
No.
I can't remember it.
Well, I was going to ask about your experience. Someone in the documentary referred to it as like a baptism. I wondered, like, what did you get out of Freeparty, and what did you and your mates get out of it?
I mean, the baptism was when I went to Glastonbury. That was a baptism for me when I walked into that Travellers Field, 1990, for the first time. That just fucking blew my mind, and that changed my whole life basically. And I didn't know it at that point, but that was going to be me in 2 years' time. And so it was a massive baptism for me. I was into Jimi Hendrix and Creedence Clearwater Revival and hip hop, and I went there and I just come across these fucking amazing, creative, filthy, lovely people, and it just changed my life forever. And I didn't know at the time, but that's what I was going to become, and that's what I was going to do. And what it meant to me at the time, and you heard it a lot in the film, it was freedom. You know, we literally did whatever we wanted to do whenever we wanted to do it. And there was something really amazing about that, because you didn't feel like you had to answer to anyone apart from your community, you know, and your community told you when you were a twat, you know, and your community told you when you were amazing. And that's all that really mattered was, you know, we knew what we were doing was amazing. We just didn't know it was going to be, you know, what it is today. But it was just a sense of freedom, essentially. It was a sense of being able to kick a door off an empty warehouse, find the electricity, turn it on, put a sound system on, and then thousands of people would turn up from all over the place and have this amazing experience. And to feel like you were part of that, to be part of that experience, you know, it was a huge euphoria boost for me, you know. I actually stopped taking drugs in '92 when I started doing the parties as a raver, because I was getting the buzz that I was getting off the drugs a few years before off of the parties. You know, it was just having so many people in one place of all different types of people, you know, and you see it in the videos from there, you know, we had all walks of life there. That's what I rushed off of. That was my buzz, you know.
And one thing you mentioned there was like the thousands of people. And one thing that stands out in the documentary and from researching this is like how much of a huge collaborative effort these parties were, from the DJs to the people sussing out the spaces to the people bringing the equipment and doing all the lifts. Did you find that, or did you feel like this was part of a wider political movement, or was it just about letting loose and having fun?
Me personally, no. I didn't have a political edge to it at all. I didn't really know what politics was at the time. I was 19 years old, 20 years old, and I didn't focus on, you know, what was going on in the political world. So for me, I didn't. I watch these documentaries now, and I listen to the podcast now of everyone talking about it, and I think, wow, fucking hell, did I miss out on this political thing? Because I just didn't have it in it wasn't part of what I was doing. I literally just wanted to put on parties and get as many people in a room as possible and play music to people. A lot of the time, we never knew who was going to play at our parties. You know, the first Bedlam party we did on Holloway Road, the first 50 people that came through the door, loads of them became our crew. It was like that, you know. There was, I remember someone coming through the door, and this really tall Swedish girl who's like became one of our crew. They ran the door after coming to the party. I was like, we need someone to run the door. Can you do the donations? They're like, yeah, we'll do the donations. It was that. That's what it was about for me. There wasn't a political element. I mean, Thatcher took my milk away. That's all I knew about. That's it, really. Yeah, there wasn't not the thing.
But Aaron and Ed, in both the documentary and in your book, there's connections drawn between like squatters' rights and later direct action groups. From your research, what have you picked up on, even if Steve wasn't participating in it?
Yeah. I was going to say, Steve is not alone in being kind of avowedly apolitical in his intentions. I've chatted to loads of Free Party promoters or warehouse rave promoters from the years immediately preceding the kind of main period covered in Free Party, who say, yeah, no, we didn't want to be Jeremy Corbyn, we just wanted to get off our tits. And I mean, that's not untrue, but if you are assembling thousands of people without permission, smashing through police barricades and like sending decoy cars off and not charging for it, like that's fairly clearly a political act in my view. Like it's striking right at the heart of society that says that everything is a product to be sold, that you're either a consumer or a creator. It totally rewires that. It can't help but be deeply political in effect, even if it's not necessarily political in intent. And of course, that then aligns it with wider networks of more overt political activism. That for the first year that the Criminal Justice Act was in effect, 90% of the prosecutions under it were not of ravers at all, but of hunt saboteurs, which is a much more overtly political kind of group gathering. But yeah, the two, in effect, I think sat right next to each other, even if the people organising it or the people attending it didn't necessarily turn up with a manifesto in hand or a particular kind of political objective. They were still doing something political.
I mean, I think I totally agree with Ed that everybody I interviewed basically said, oh, we weren't political, as in what they really meant was they weren't party political. They didn't have party politics built into what they were doing, making, parties for people. But there's no doubt that DIY, they're literally called DIY. That is effectively an anarchist kind of concept, let's face it. They were hunt-sabbing, they were vegetarians, they were, and they still are, living a kind of an alternative lifestyle even before they were throwing parties. And that's why they had an affinity to meeting travellers, because they understood that this was kind of people living out some sort of thing, what they were doing. And I think even though, what seems about the sort of London-based squat kind of rave scene, as in just the act of squatting is in some ways, without thinking about it, maybe as, we're doing this for a political act, but taking free space back is a political kind of, is a political act in some way. But I think it's the party political bit, which literally, all of them said, we weren't party political. And maybe that was as a result of, 12 years of Thatcherism or what have you before that, just to kind of create that apathy, of which I think is possibly quite familiar to people now. There's a certain, politicians, they're all the same, politics is all the same, but that maybe turned itself into a form of direct kind of, ecstatic radical action, which came about as a result of these fantastic events, which we've both covered.
I mean, if anything's going to turn you off politics, it's Margaret Thatcher, right? Do you know what I mean? She's not exactly like inspiring you to get involved in it, But I'm actually, now I can look back in hindsight, I'm quite glad that the movement that I was part of was political in the right way. I didn't think I was political, but as Aaron says, we was political. What we were doing was political, and I'm glad that we were on the right path in hindsight.
On the right side of history, right? So whether people were there for explicitly for politics or not, a big draw of these parties was obviously the music. Steve, can you tell me a bit about the different sound systems and what kind of music they specialised in?
I think, I'm going to say it, back in the day, we didn't really have a musical policy per se. This guy here, he was kind of our musical director if we ever had one.
This is Murph, by the way.
Mr. Murph, yeah. And we literally, like when I said earlier, we didn't know who was going to play on the sound system. People would turn up with record boxes and go, can I play? And I remember this man would go, your record's good. Yeah, all right, you can play. And it was like that. But it became after Castle Morton, and when it started to get darker, because of the vibe, the police, the violence and everything, the music started to get darker, and we all started playing a bit harder music you know, and that's my memory of it changing. Before that, it was everything. In our parties anyway, it was everything. You know, we had all styles of music. No DJ played one style, and that's what I actually loved about our parties, was that it was there for everybody. And I think that's why there was such a mix of people there. You know, it did become later on where it was techno, you know, and we always used to like do a little half hour of really hardcore gabba at sunrise, you know, get DJ Warlock in there, do you know what I mean? Get Jason in there and just fucking stab it out with some gabba, you know, and it was, you know, so we kind of had a play on that. But for us, I mean, when we went to Europe, we were playing reggae, we were playing hip hop, we were playing ska music, we were playing techno, we played everything, you know. So we didn't really have a musical style as such. But I mean, I guess the Tribe kind of developed a style, you know, especially when they went out to Europe, because we were all playing the same music when we were here, you know, all that hands in the air, the piano, it was great, you know. And then I guess the Tribe developed more of a style that when they went out, we never did though. We didn't know how to.
And DIY kind of had that. The irony of it is that they were like tough northern bods playing really fluffy, deep house music from kind of West Coast America. So in a way, I suppose that. But there was definitely a bit from my research that you know, and seeing all the footage, was that there was a bit where everybody seemed to be basically playing this amazing melting pot of music up to around Castle Morton, where somehow things have become complex in that sort of thing. If things start kind of simple and they get more and more complex as they develop, and that complexity means more and more subdivisions, and then those subdivisions get hardened in whatever way. And I think post Castle Morton, I think it seemed to me that more and more genres exploded overnight. And,
yeah, exactly.
You know,
I don't remember there being genres.
No.
Do you know what I mean? DJs would come and play everything, and all of a sudden now there's so many genres. I can't get my head around it, if I'm honest. You know, now, you know, like, you know, I run areas in Glastonbury, and when we talk to the programming team, and they're going to do liquid drum and bass, and I'm like, great, what's that then? And they play it, I'm like, oh, that sounds like the drum and bass that we played a long time
94.
ago. You know, yeah, exactly, right? And I'm like, it wasn't called liquid then. But I mean, there's just a thing now where, you know, the genres are a thing, right? It's like everyone has to create their own genre. But back then, I think DIY was an obvious one, really fluffy, you know, Warp as well, and Tribe a bit more harder. And I think we were just a bit of everything. We were a bit, did everything, anything.
And do you have like a favourite that you want to share from that time that you associate with those parties or with Bedlam specifically?
Well, I was thinking about this, and there's a track that I think you've got it. Have you got it? Yeah, the Jack track. It was a track that Murph played at a party in Stamford Hill, and I remember this was really. He played the a cappella version of it, and we turned that. It was in a massive fridge in a supermarket that we squatted, and we turned all the lights off, and he played the a cappella of this track, and then he was like, right, I'm gonna bring it in, turn the lights on. And I remember turning the lights on when the beat came on, and everyone was going mental to the a cappella. Do you know what I mean? There was no music. It was just this extremely deep Chicago house voice, and everyone knew it, and there was no music. And then he was like, "Get ready!" Like, bang, and everyone was just like, "Fucking, it was mental." It was.
Should we put it on?
Yeah, go on.
So,
go on.
Jack had a groove.
Yeah, Jack had a groove. Yeah. Jack had a groove.
This is not the a cappella.
No, this is not the a cappella. Stop, all Murph saying stop, all musical director saying stop. Yeah.
That's the club version.
Unfortunately, Spotify don't have the other versions.
Sorry.
The voice comes in quite late on this one, doesn't it? The lyrics to this music, if you listen to it, it's really inclusive. So the
tune.
Yeah, it's not the vinyl. Did you bring your vinyl? Rest in peace. Rest in peace.
Sorry, we've only got Spotify right now. So you mentioned all these different styles of music. I wondered if any of you could share a bit about whether, like, the different subcultures involved and whether they integrated, whether they were hanging out and listening to each other's like scenes, style of music, or was it quite a segregated situation?
So, I've been talking a lot, but I grew up on a council estate not far from here, and the music of my generation, of what I grew up on, was reggae music. That was the sound that was going through my whole estate, and we used to sneak out at 11, 12 years old and go to sound systems like Unity Sound System, Saxon Sound System, Coxon. And I remember being at a Unity dance, and they played Tainted Love Impedance, from by Impedance. And I was standing there going, what the fuck is this? It's Tainted Love, you know, that was the Ragga Twins. That was them, that was when they were transitioning into, you know, the dance music scene, you know, and it was amazing to hear. So for me, reggae music has been a massive influence in the whole music rave culture. You know, I think that was the music that allowed it to transition into what it is today.
I mean, the other sort of inspiration for the rave scene in technological terms was obviously kind of blues dances, so unlicensed parties catering primarily to Caribbean audiences, communities that were effectively shut out of licensed venues. So a lot of that's, yeah, along with kind of the travellers of the Beanfield era, they're the other kind of, I guess, kind of subcultural tribe who really feed into the beginning of kind of the acid house scene in the late 80s as well.
And there's a really great chapter on that in Ed's book, so you should read it. Aaron, is there like a particular sound system that stood out to you in your research, or like a particular track from that time that you found from researching?
There's 39 tracks that I still got to find the money to pay for a full release in the film. I hope you agreed it's a fucking banging soundtrack, by the way. Thank you. Really hard to distill down to one. If I had to say one, it would be Papua New Guinea, Future Sound of London, mainly because for that kind of Castle Morton bit in the film, and for me memorising 92, it was this combination of the whole hippie psychedelic thing, as well as the breakbeat thing that was definitely, 92 was a breakbeat kind of year, and it was there's a dub bass line in it, and there is all of these kind of plethora of kind of somewhat ambient samples. So it feels like, to me, that's the one out of all of them that feels like it's summarised that moment. And it's the natural world. There's loads of samples of birds, and you know, it feels like the best example of that kind of 92 psychedelic drum and bass-ish kind of combination. So yeah,
cool.
Give us a minute or two of it. The first minute's really ambient, so let's see how much you can tolerate.
Should I skip ahead, or
or put a new remix of it. It would be awful. Dub bass line, which was actually sampled from an earlier tune. Train spotters, can you figure out what the tune was? It's Me Beat Manifesto. Told you the first minute was really ambient. There's the hands in the air. Here we go. Turn it on. Tell me who hasn't got massive tingles up the back of their neck just right now. Okay. If you haven't, you're dead, frankly.
Thank you for sharing that. Obviously, in the documentary, we saw that this whole history is characterised by loads of ups and downs, but there was a noticeable shift and a decline when the Free Party, as people like you, Steve, knew it, started to change, and there was the rise of the super club and the superstar DJ figure. Ed, do you want to tell me a bit about that shift and like why that started to happen and the clampdown and all that was associated with it?
Sure, I was thinking when Steve was talking about why there are so many genres now, and the answer is capitalism. It's much easier to market a techno party to techno fans and a house party to house fans than it is to just throw it all into a slightly confusing kind of stew. So after the passage of the Criminal Justice Act in 1994, I don't think it's a coincidence that you see the rise of licensed bricks and mortar clubs that have very, very aggressive marketing and branding angles around them. You know, the Ministry of Sounds, the Gate Crashers, the Creams. There's a couple of clips on YouTube that are really, really educational. There's two like ITV news articles on Cream in Liverpool, but one is from about 9 months, a year before the Criminal Justice Act passes, and the other is from about a year afterwards. And the shift in the vibe and the energy is really pronounced and really telling. So the one from kind of late 92, early 93, I think, it looks like a kind of warehouse party. Everyone's wearing stuff that they might have been wearing at Shum in 1988. You know, baggy t-shirts, greasy hair, everyone looks like a bit out of it. And then kind of end of 1994, early 1995, it's all like guys in shiny shirts and gelled hair and women in spangly tops. They have an interview with the like head bouncer where they're like, yeah, no moustaches, no sequins. It's very interesting. It's like very aspirational. It's very urbane. It's very it's like commercial. Like not just in terms of like the culture itself, but the entire mechanism around it. The Criminal Justice Act was an incredibly effective way of like gutting the competition for Britain's leisure and entertainment industries, right? It was funneling people back into licensed venues where profits could be taxed, behaviour could be regulated, venues could be held to account. So the law that got passed in the House of Commons following the death of Leah Betts in 1995, so shortly after the passage of the Criminal Justice Act, specifically clamped down on late night venues and made drug use an immediate reason for a licence to be revoked. So essentially, again, kind of sanitising that culture, making it more hospitable to a particular audience. So the Criminal Justice Act wasn't just an attempt to clamp down on free parties. It was as you rightly point out in the film, it was an incredibly wide-ranging attack on civil liberties across the spectrum of British society. So obviously there were the clauses on raves, there were the bits on public order that people generally know about, so restrictions on squatting, on hunt saboteuring and on environmental protests, but it was also the first piece of British legislation to codify the use and retention of DNA data, which obviously now continues to be a huge issue with wildly disproportionate effects in terms of the race of people who are maintained on that database. It brought back in powers that had previously been revoked for the police to stop and search people without suspicion of them having committed a crime. The sus laws from the 70s that had been removed from the statute book and then were brought in ostensibly as an attempt to clamp down on grimy ravers off their face on drugs, throwing massive parties, but were subsequently used to target men of Asian origin during the War on Terror, and are now used to harass young black men in inner cities as well. So there's it's a law with a huge, broad-ranging set of implications for British society, but it also created the space for a very different type of dance culture to emerge. And it's interesting now we've kind of gone full circle. You will go to parties in buildings that are, abandoned warehouses that Spiral Drive or Bedlam might have occupied 30 years ago, but are now run in partnership with colossal multinational property developers, or festivals in fields that DIY might have once put their tent up in, but are now, run by AEG or like huge kind of global entertainment conglomerates. So it's, the Criminal Justice Act is kind of the bit that all of that hinges on.
There's something with the criminal, like I said, I wasn't very political back then, but one thing, the first time I realised that the Criminal Justice Act wasn't about just us, because that's what we were the headline, right? It was like we were the reason they could bring in this law with loads of other clandestine stuff underneath, was when we were queuing up outside Parliament. They were debating it in Parliament, and they've got a public gallery, and we were never going to get in, but we thought, we'd queue up. And there was the travelling, the New Age travellers, the ravers on one side on this barricade, and then there was the gypsies, and the Romanian and Irish gypsies are on. They separated us because it was divide and conquer, right? Really, we should have been on the same team, but they separated us, and we were kind of accused of bringing this on top for them. So they were having a go at us. And then there was all these really old people in the middle. And I remember going up to one of them going, "What are you doing here?" And they're like, "We're from the Ramblers Association." I was like, what are you doing here? They're like, "This law stops us from walking the land." It's like, I just didn't understand it right. And that's when I looked into it and I was like, it's stopping, they're stopping us from, they're trying to take away bylaws that allow people to walk common land, and farmers, who basically have to allow people to walk through, were being able to stop it. And I later talked to someone else about it, and they were saying, because if we stop people from walking through, it becomes arable land again, and then we can claim subsidies for not growing any food, which is an old Second World War thing that came. So it was just, I thought, fucking hell, this is really complex. Let's put on another rave. Forget about it.
Ed, did you want to play your selection?
Yes, sure. So the track I've chosen is a tune by Orteka, an experimental electronic duo, and this was released as part of the Anti EP in mid 1994. All proceeds of which went to the National Council for Civil Liberties. So this tune did potentially, at least theoretically, pay part of Keir Starmer's salary in the early 90s, which I quite like. But it's programmed in such a way as to try and sidestep the clause in the Criminal Justice Act that defines music played at free parties as let's see if I can remember this music. Wholly or partially characterised by the emission of a succession of repetitive beats. So Orteka decided to program their record in such a way that the drum pattern in each bar is subtly different, and in the liner notes they make this clear and say that it should therefore be legal under the new restrictions, but we advise you to have a lawyer and a musicologist present at your rave in the event of police harassment. Which is, so you occasionally see articles in The Guardian about where's the protest music gone because no one wants to be Billy Bragg anymore. But it's a really good example of a way in which protest music doesn't necessarily need to sound like Bob Dylan.
why we needed drugs.
So, in the documentary, you say something to the effect of like, let's stop looking backwards, we can look forward. We've discussed how partying has changed so much over the last couple of decades. I wonder if you each have something to say about what you think the future of partying should look like or could look like.
Well, I've got two daughters, 13 and 11, and I'm really kind of aware that I could seem like a really bad old fart, having spent 6 years making a film about the old days and how brilliant they were. And actually, I'm really, really keen for that not to be the legacy of this film. What I'm really keen, I suppose, in what I've experienced more and more, is that through screenings, and particularly screenings to younger people who weren't there, that the experience they have is that maybe they get somewhat inspired, as in, wow, that was really exciting back then. But what they then go on and do is something that surprises our generation massively. Maybe shocks our generation. Maybe does something way, way, way beyond what we could imagine. I'm really hopeful that that is the case, because young people have got the energy. They've usually got the spirit of being on the edges of possible culture, of what can be created, of what can be achieved. Whereas people out of our generation, I hate to say it, Steve, me and you, you settle into a certain rhythm. So I'm really hopeful that actually the younger generation will basically surprise me so much that I'll be a bit shocked, I'll be a bit disgusted, I'll be a bit like, no, you can't do that, that's outrageous, stop doing that, that's so shocking. And then 30 years' time, somebody will be making a documentary about that and be going, wow, wasn't it amazing when all those people did that in the 2030s? That was fucking mind-blowing, that's changed the future, that's what I'm hoping.
And what about you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I said that in the film because in the last kind of 10 years, I've done a lot of interviews and a lot of people's kind of dissertations on what we did back, and everyone looks back. Do you know what I mean? I'm not putting on squat parties anymore. I don't do weekly parties, but they're going off right now. The youth are smashing it right now. They're more prolific than what we did. Back in the day. I love saying that. But I just feel like we need to not stop looking back, because it happened, right? And let's celebrate it and, enjoy it. But we should really, we should embrace what the younger people are doing now. And to a certain extent, they're doing similar things to what we did, but it's a different time. And a lot of people say to me, the heyday, what was it like, the highlight of it? I'm like, no, that was my highlight. Today is someone else's highlight, and we shouldn't forget that, and we shouldn't, not, bring that to the fore as well. I mean, I've got a little 3-year-old, and yeah, I don't know, I guess I'm kind of like a bit terrified, really. He stays up longer than me at Glastonbury Festival. Do you know what I mean? I'm a bit worried about where he's going to go, but like you say, I want to be that person that doesn't stifle him to go off and do something if he chooses to do something of this nature, or whatever is going to come in 2030 or whatever it is, or 2050, But I think the future, I mean, this musical journey is probably one of the longest running journeys for a genre of music, and it's so alive now. It's more alive now than I think it was, when we were doing it in our heyday. I'm really positive about the future of free parties, especially because I feel like there is a movement, that is still really underground, out there, mostly out of the cities, and I feel like that's going to come to the fore in a few years' time, and we're going to be looking back and, oh, they did that, because I'm not there doing it. Do you know what I mean? I'm now, I do charity and I do Glastonbury Festival, and it's a different thing. But what they're doing now is amazing. I think we should celebrate that.
There are two particular moments that come to mind in answer to that question. The first is a screening of Freeparty that I went to in Bristol, possibly one of the earlier public screenings of the film, and it's it's the end of my book, and I describe seeing the crowd, which was made up to a certain extent of kind of Spiral Tribe lifers. Spiral Tribe were playing kind of the closing party after this film screening, and you could see the kind of the people who'd obviously been living this life since the 90s, but then there were loads of people in their early 20s turning up to this in the same way that like Mark Harrison would have gone to Stonehenge Free Festival in the 80s, and kind of understanding and uncovering this history that they weren't part of, but that maybe offers them something that they can learn from and iterate on. And I found that really inspiring, that kind of passing of the torch. And then the second thing that gives me hope, and one of the things that I think is really interesting is the free party scene kind of returning to the source. So it's still hugely popular. It's just, you know, the parties are, as you mentioned in the film, kind of 500 people dotted around the country rather than 30,000 people being the lead item on the 6 o'clock news. And I did a talk about my book, and afterwards these two very, very excited people in their early 20s came up and talked very enthusiastically at me for about 20 minutes about their, how they and all their friends had got, and you're going to like this, Steve, really into GABA and started throwing GABA parties for like 20 of their mates. And it was brilliant. And then it got to like 40 people, and they were like, you know what, no. And so they just ended the whole thing. And that to me I love that. Like taking the lessons that you can learn from this era of British social history. Because even Spiral Tribe and DIY, they didn't set out to like create a like multimedia empire. They wanted to throw a party for their mates. So taking that lesson, creating something that like speaks to your specific community and your little corner of the world, but doing it like really intensely and with real conviction. I think collectively, thousands and thousands of people doing that adds up to something of really real importance and power. And that I think gives me hope for the future too.
Nice. Thank you so much, guys, and thank you again to Joy Collective and Pelican House. Maybe we should finish. Oh yeah. We have probably about 10 more minutes. If anyone wants to ask a question, maybe like raise a hand. It's quite dark. I can't actually see it.
Yeah. I got a question. Who is responsible for turning from that lovely music of everything to that horrible BPM GABA? Because that tormented me for years. It's like, it was the worst.
I just love the idea it's like one person's fault.
Can we give it? It was you!
Definitely wasn't me.
Pick them up and put them on trial, you know what I mean? It was awful.
Murph will probably know. Murph will probably know the actual person.
I reckon it was basically the system that oppressed us and what we were doing, and we were hands in the air, having a laugh, hugging people and having fun, and then they beat the shit out of us, and we got fucking angry about it, and then the music that started coming out, we were like, yeah, that's more reflective of what the fuck we feel like right now, and we'll play some of that.
We have another question.
Yes.
Well, to Aaron, what was the biggest obstacle that you have to overcome to make the documentary?
Jesus, biggest. I don't even know where to start with that question. It's literally been obstacle after obstacle. Has anybody else made a film in the audience, by the way? So I didn't realise this. Stupidly, foolhardily, it's an extremely hard thing to do, to make a film, a feature-length film, completely independently without any money or institutional support. So it's a completely stupid, ridiculous idea in the first place, but done in the spirit, I suppose, of the subject matter, which was, can you just start doing something and with your mates somehow make something happen? The hardest bit we find right now is not the hardest bit I found right at the start. the hardest bit I found right at the start was actually just getting everyone to talk to me and to have conversations and then go and interview with everybody. Thankfully, this chap down here, Murph, basically introduced me to about kind of 50% of them. So you meet the right person, they introduce you to the next person, the next person, the next person. They say, oh, he's all right, actually. You know, you do an interview with him and he'll be all right. But the problems then are totally different to the problems I've got now, which is just raw money. As in, I need about 50 grand to actually release the film because the licenses for music are extremely expensive. The licenses for archive done by the likes of Getty and BBC and ITN are extremely expensive to license. So I'm so privileged I can show it to like a festival type audience like this, a community audience like this, and it's fantastic hearing all of your feedback and your reactions to it. It's honestly, it's an extremely wonderful thing for me to get to this stage. But I would love this story to get out to the widest possible audience, not for my own ego, just because I think it's a fucking great story. It's a banging soundtrack, and I really wish, and that is sort of telly or streaming. That's just how people consume things. And so, but to get to that, that is our massive mission now, is to find a chunk of money to do that. But basically what I realised was each climb up the mountain was, you felt like, oh my God, I've made it here. And then you go, oh fuck, it goes on for miles and miles more. And then you go up and it just keeps on going. So I'm hopefully at the last bit where I can see the top of Mont Blanc, but who knows? Maybe the Everest is above that.
Thank you.
Any more? Okay, well, let's hear it for Safi, Ed. Have we got one more? Okay.
Yeah, just with the licensing problems, it sounds you need to show the film at free party festivals.
We've done as many of them as we've been invited to, actually. So, donation-based, free. I mean, we're always happy to go along. As pretty much anytime somebody's invited us to go along to something that we think will be a way of spreading the word, we'll go. So, as long as we're not taking the resources out of the film that will eventually get it out there, as long as we can pay for itself, then we're, please invite us around the world. Please just spread the word. It's like all these things. It always relies on word of mouth and the kind of will of the community, actually. So this is why we're doing things like this, and it's why it's so great to speak to people about all the themes and the stories inside the film, because that's the point of it, is to spread these ideas that are both in Ed's book, Steve's life, and to get them out into the world. And the only way to do that is generally not the corporate way, it's through the word of mouth way. And so the more you talk about it, the more you tweet about it and whatever else you do about it, will help the whole process hopefully get there eventually.
Anyone else? Hands up? Okay, well, let's hear it for Safi, Ed, Steve, and Aaron for an amazing documentary. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.